Hey guys, Walter Sorrells back with more tips for the knife maker. Today, an interview with me. So just a quick intro of what you're going to be watching today. I did an interview probably about 2 weeks ago with the guys at Coal Ironworks who make presses and induction heaters and all kinds of cool stuff for blacksmiths and bladesmiths. And they have a great podcast called the Coalcast, and they asked me to be on it a couple weeks ago. So I did, and that's what you're watching today. All right, let's jump right on into it.
Hey guys, welcome to the Coalcast. Today we have the incredible Walter Sorrells joining us. So we're going to be talking about CNC machining, martial arts, writing books, all the different kinds of things that it takes to be a successful bladesmith in 2024, as well as following your passion and all the ways that will shape your journey. So check it out. This was an incredible podcast. Really looking forward to the feedback on what you think about our episode with Walter Sorrells. Perfect timing. All right. Well, Mr. Sorrells, delighted to have you here today.
Thanks.
Super excited to kind of
here.
dig into your backstory and see how you have developed from the very beginning an interest in blacksmithing and bladesmithing, obviously, and just give us a little detail on how you got interested in working with steel and the development of that over time.
Yeah, so it was really a weird happenstantical kind of thing. I started out my career in a completely unrelated field. I was a novelist. And so I was working on a book where the main character was going to be a swordsmith. I'd been doing martial arts for a long time and had an interest in Japanese culture and Japanese swords and so on. And so I wanted to do this character. And, I figured, okay, if I'm going to do this character, I need to have some kind of tangible thing in my hands that, gives me some insight into how this guy would think. So I got this little bitty piece of, just mild steel. I mean, I think I bought it at Home Depot, but I don't even know how you can buy a piece of steel this small. So it was like 2 inches long. Maybe I cut it off with a hacksaw or something. So I got a little Burns-O-Matic propane torch. I had a ball peen hammer, and I heated this. I held onto it with vice grips. So I heat this thing up. And it just barely gets enough color in it that you can see that something's happened to it. And I started beating on it on a rock. And, the metal just barely moved. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And, anybody who's into knife making understands you get the bug and it just sticks with you. And, it took hold of me. So for 15 years probably, I wrote in the morning, and then in the afternoons I'd start making Japanese swords. And for really probably 10 years of that period, I really did them both as full-time jobs. And it was 7 days a week I was working, and a lot of times I'd work way into the evenings, and it was just kind of a treadmill. And after a while, my writing career was becoming kind of less fun. And so, I was just like, hey, I got to pick one of these things and just stick with it. And so, I let the writing thing go, and I've been doing full-time swordsmithing ever since, or knife making, whatever. I have to say, I still work 7 days a week. I guess I got onto that, that little glide path, and now that's just where I'm stuck. So
yeah. So when you got started, did you know that you wanted to share your knowledge immediately? Like, was the passion kind of overflowing and because it sounds like you pretty quickly started sharing what you were doing and learning on YouTube, right? I mean, well,
YouTube didn't come along until later. So here was what happened. I had absolutely no intention of sharing anything with anybody. It was completely just one of these things where you fall off of one thing onto another thing. So the way it happened was, it sort of rapidly happened that I figured out the hamon thing, and my model was Japanese swords, and so I was trying to recreate Japanese, pretty accurately Japanese hamons on, my sort of hybrid Americanized style things. And, I kind of cracked the code on that pretty quickly. And so, I was posting all these things on good old message boards back in the good old days, and people would see my stuff and they'd send me emails. Hey man, how do you make your hamons? And the whole hamon thing, I wasn't the first guy to do hamons on Western stuff, but it was a lot of people started kind of noticing what I was doing on that. So I would get all these guys emailing me, and so I would write this long, extensive email back to each one of these people, basically saying the exact same thing. And after I'd done that innumerable times, I was like, this is just stupid. I'm spending all this time saying the exact same thing, and you can't convey very much in an email anyway, so it's just it's kind of futile to begin with, and it's just not a good way of doing it. So I was like, I'll just, make this super short, cheap little movie. I'll sell it for $10 just to pay for the shipping, and then I'll shut all these people up and I won't have to talk to them again. And, so being the obsessive type that I am, I got this little camcorder. This was in pre-DSLR days, so I got this little camcorder, and I recorded it, and immediately, because I had this writing background, so if I start thinking about here's some problem, I start kind of thinking of a narrative arc and how to put it all together. And so it was just kind of natural for me to write a script for the thing and to do it in a kind of, A to B to C to D kind of way. And so I did this video and started selling it, and I got some response for that, and so I started doing some other videos. Again, I'm just selling these DVDs, sending them through the mail, and for young people, the mail is a thing where you go and you stick a thing with a stamp on it, and it goes to another place. I did that for a while, and one day, I'd been hearing about this YouTube thing, and so I was like, well, maybe I'll take a little, clip from one of these videos that I've done, because by that point I'd done a forging video, how to forge Japanese swords, how to polish them, how to make all the fittings and all that junk. So I had a big set of these videos. These DVDs, and so I posted this little tiny clip on this thing called YouTube, and then I went away. So I came back like 3 months later, just out of curiosity, because I'd sold a few more DVDs, but the numbers of DVDs I would sell were I could count on my hand kind of, and so I come back, and over 100,000 people have watched this little clip, which was like 2 minutes taken from a 2-hour video. And I was like, none of these guys bought the video, and yet there's some weird interest that I can't explain in watching a 2-minute clip from this other thing. So maybe there's some kind of appetite for this. So, I basically looked at it as here's a little marketing opportunity for me. And I really wasn't thinking of it in any sort of grandiose, like, hey, I'm going to share my knowledge. You know, it was nothing like that. I'm just trying to make a living here, you know. And so I started putting out little instructional kind of things, mostly about Japanese swords at the time. But you know, it just sort of took off, and so I've been doing it ever since, which is, believe it or not, this will be my 15th year.
That's amazing. So how much of that was, how much of it at this point is the educational and create, like how much of your day-to-day work is the blades, and how much of it are you spending just creating this educational resource and, you know, all that? Right.
So here's basically how it works. You know, what I try and do is to do about one a week. And so each week, you know, I'll do something, not every single week, but more or less.
Yeah.
And so, the most involved ones will be me actually making an entire knife from A to Z or doing some kind of project. But some of them, you know, I'm just blabbing about something that I think is interesting, or, you know, reviewing some kind of tool, whatever it might be. And basically every single time I make a video, it takes 3 times as long as I think it is, even though I've done this for 15 years. And I say, this is stupid. I'm just giving away my life. I'm completely underpaid for doing this thing. This is stupid. I should stop this immediately. And then next week I'm making another video.
So what's invigorating you to continue? Is it the community around the information, or
no?
What do you think it is?
You know, it's funny you mentioned the whole community thing, because I've been working with my sister on a online course kind of deal. And she is an extrovert, and she's totally into the whole community thing, and she's always talking about community, this, that, and the other. I love people, and, you know, I'm happy to deal with people and everything, but I'm an introvert. At the end of the day, I am not driven by, hey, it's a community and blah, blah. I don't really care. But, you know, that said, I have, you know, had a lot of great contacts and met a lot of people through it, and that's been super rewarding. I will say, on that score, though, the thing that was most shocking to me, especially early on, you know, I would get emails from, you know, veterans who are like, I'm suffering from PTSD, and I watched your video, and I started doing this thing, and I'm better. And I mean, it was like, wow. This is not something I intended to do. You know, I really did this. I mean, honestly, initially for selfish reasons, and then later on, you know, it's kind of scratched an itch, and it was sort of fun to do. And, you know, once you could start monetizing videos, I get a tiny little bit of money, and, you know, that's nice. I mean, anybody who makes, you know, who's in the knife making business knows that, you know, there's not just a giant cascade of money falling on your head, so every little bit helps. So, you know, basically, I look at what I do now as having this little micro business that has all these little slices to it. And so YouTube is just one of those businesses. It's a bit of a front end for me, you know, something to advertise my stuff. But, you know, it does have this unintended thing of, you know, I meet people that I wouldn't otherwise. And, you know, I hear from people in Australia or North Africa or whatever it is. Like, you know, holy, this guy's watching my stuff. Hey, by the way, am I supposed to not curse on here?
If they slip out, we'll bleep them. Not a big deal. All good. All good.
You know, in real life, I'm a, you know, drop the F-bomb all day type guy. But I never curse on my videos, so I'll be a good boy. And, and actually, you know, you asked about my early career, or at least I told you about it. And my first book, which I wrote when I was in my 20s, was just full of people dropping the F-bomb. And I had this friend who I thought was kind of a hip guy, and he read the book and he was like, you might want to think about not so much cursing. Some people find that kind of off-putting. And I was like, if this guy feels that way, I really probably should go easy on it.
Back. So when you were doing the writing as your main income, was that also kind of something that you just started doing and it grew and it was a very natural, organic process for you to become a writer initially?
Good question. Well, I guess that I probably would say no. My dad was a writer. My grandfather was in the newspaper business, and then it's lawyers on back into the 18th century. So there are word people in my family for generations and generations. So. But, in terms of writing fiction, I did have the example of my dad. But in a sense, I reacted to his entire career and said, I'm going to do it exactly the opposite from him. I was trying to write self-consciously commercial stuff. And, basically, I decided when I was in college, this is what I want to do, and I really focused on it hard. And I mean, literally, I went to I graduated from college on a Friday, and I started writing my first novel on Monday. So I didn't mess around.
Wow.
And I always tell people who are interested in doing artistic stuff, and like a lot of people, they feel like, there's something a little, wimpy about saying I'm an artist, but the reality is if you're making knives, or if you're making chairs, or if you're souping up hot rods, it's art, Art's not just painting pretty pictures on the wall, you know. And if you're going to be an artist, you totally have to be driven, and you have to be a self-starter, and you can't be looking around like, oh man, hey, have you got some ideas about, if you're not consumed with your own ideas, you're going to have a hard time doing this kind of stuff. And that doesn't mean it can't be a fantastic hobby for people, but if you really want to make it a livelihood or whatever, you better be prepared to get up and get moving.
Yeah. Well, I think you're a good example of get up and get moving. You have a myriad of different things that you kind of articulated that. You see this as you have a small business made up of a lot of little businesses and different things that you're doing, YouTube being one, the swords, and then you've also got, obviously, Tactix Armory is another. So when you're moving through, are you the primary person running every aspect of each of these facets of your business, or do you have help? How do you set that up?
Yeah, so I'm one of these people who always thinks like, well, should I get somebody to help out on it? Well, then I'm going to have to educate him on how I want it done and all of this stuff. I'll just do it myself. Yeah, and so. I had a guy working, doing CNC stuff for me for a while. My sister helps me out kind of on the marketing side. And I've got a guy who, has been doing sheaths for me for years. But at the end of the day, this is pretty much just me. And, I'm a horrible businessman. I'm really stupid about how I do this as a business. So this is totally the dumbest way to do it. But, I mean, the flip side is I get to control everything I do. Every day I get up, I don't have to be responsible to anybody or for anybody else. I don't have to worry about making payroll or, my guys are, going to go on welfare if I have a little misstep in the market, But these days, I'm kind of ramping up the whole Tactix Armory thing, and I suspect that, I'm going to end up hiring some people to ramp this thing up. But I'm not quite there yet.
So when we're talking to lots of, let's say, small startup people that are wanting to pursue maybe it's any form of their art, right? Like whether it's woodworking or it's blacksmithing and bladesmithing and making knives and growing that. I do think that there's often, there's kind of two paths, right? Where you can pursue kind of for internal principles, if you would. I would kind of attribute you to that side where you're saying, you know, I want to do it this way, and I'm not going to change that, and so I'm going to pursue this and be the sole owner and author of this. Obviously, we went the route of expanding and hiring and trying to, you know, build a larger entity. But I think, what would you say was the primary catalyst that gave you the confidence to start when you did on your own? You know, you said you're going to stop writing and you're going to start making blades. What gave you, or what do you think was the catalyst of that decision being so confident in your willingness to take that step?
Well, so specifically in this particular case, you know, I'd been splitting my time for 15 years, and I mean, for real, I was making blades as a full-time occupation. It's just I was cramming 70 hours a week into my work week. And so, you know, it wasn't like I was just like, oh, hey, this will be fun. You know, I mean, I knew what the parameters of this thing were. But I will say, you know, I've been reading a lot of stuff about genetics recently. And, you know, I feel like the whole nature-nurture thing has pretty well been, it's been figured out that contrary to what people thought 100 years ago, nurture is this much and nature is this much and nurture is about this much. And so I think I was just born hard-headed and willing to, you know, just like have an idea and then feel like I could do it. But I will say, and this is something that I one of the facets of doing the YouTube stuff and some of the training and other, you know, teaching and stuff like that that's allied to that I end up doing is that, you know, I always tell people, look, you have to split your mind when you're an artist. There's a part of you that has to be just this hopeful, eternal optimist. But you have, if that's all you are, you'll really never accomplish anything, or you'll at least be, you know, crashing and burning all the time, because there has to be another part of your mind that's extremely critical, practical, hard-headed, you know, that's like, no, that's not going to work, man. You just got to let that go and move on, you know, and it's not... there's no magic formula for that kind of personality, and I think it's kind of rare, you know. But if you, I mean, one of the things about being an entrepreneur or an artist or whatever is it helps to be self-reflective. So, you know, I would counsel anybody who's out there, you know, trying X or Y or Z and feeling like, wow, I'm just not getting any traction on this. Look at what you're doing. Not in a like, oh, I'm terrible, I'm bad, I'm a loser. Just look dispassionately as though you were some dude off the street and say, what am I not doing? Could I staff this thing that I detest? Could I hire some dude, you know, in the Philippines for, you know, piecework to do the social media side of what I'm doing? Right. Could I... you know, focus on one thing, you know, or whatever it is. But if you look at yourself and say, well, probably the reason that this is not working out is X, then figure out a way to get around X. And it's not necessarily like you have to bulldoze over that. Just look at your own character and say, hey, what am I good at? What's fun to me? What makes me get out of bed every morning? Try and focus on that and figure out a way around the stuff that you suck at.
Right. I mean, leaning into your strengths, right? And
right.
basically
Absolutely.
leveraging your strengths to say, okay, instead of trying to go the route of fixing what I'm bad at, I'm going to find people that are excellent at it, and I'm going to bring them alongside me. And it doesn't mean that you have to hire them, especially in today's age. It's like so
right.
easy to find workers to come in and help out for, this project, or I need a solution for this issue. We use that all the time when we're doing our, website rebuilding, and it's like, we're not coders, and I don't need a full-time coder. I can go hire
right.
one and bring them in for that one specific task and make my life moving forward a heck of a lot easier. I remember when we started Coal, our first tax season, we had just mismanaged how we were going to run the accounts, and we hired right at the last minute, a tax lady, and she hands us a $57,000 bill, and she's like, "All right, I need a check," and I was like, "Great, that's great news." And
been there.
So it's like, okay, so we both are bad at, Andy, my partner at the time, and I was like, yeah, we're both really bad at this. And so, shortly after we went and hired another tax firm, they righted all the wrongs. We ended up with a $20,000 tax bill. But, there are just things that pull the wind out of my sails personally when I'm passionate about a project and we're moving forward. The distractions can be cloying and really remove the focus on what I could be actually helpful with, especially as a business owner and somebody that's in the fold daily trying to make things happen. So I think that's been a consistent theme that I've heard from a lot of people that have made the jump and been successful. Is you don't have to be great at everything. Find the things in a self-reflective manner that you're excellent at and lean into them full
100%.
force.
Yeah.
So when you're doing your filming, I'm very curious about, because you said, do you do it sounds very formal. You write a script, you have a plan. I mean, you seem like a very orderly guy. So is that very natural for you to do it that way?
I would say I'm an orderly, disorderly guy. It's really, it's more, at least what gets me started on anything is obsession more than here's a list of, all the,
right.
But, I'll tell you one thing, and, this is kind of leaning into your strengths, is that, some of the most, I would say probably most of the most successful social media people are people who, have big extroverted personalities, and they can just talk on camera and just sound glib about anything. And really, I think that glibness is the quality that is most important in YouTube. I don't have that. I'm the guy who's like, I'm thinking on my feet all the time. And I tried this occasionally just to extemporize my way through videos, and it always sucks. It always just ends up that I'm back there editing all the, all that stuff has to come out. And, and so it's just easier to write a script. And, I spent 30, 40 years of my life, whatever the number is, writing stuff. So it's second nature for me.
Sure, of course. So how would you say that are you more motivated now in this season by the process, learning, or exploration? What are you finding to be consistently motivating at this stage, right? I mean, you're 15 years in, you've got a lot of water
25.
under the bridge.
25.
Okay.
So 25 years into the knife making part of it.
Okay. So that's a pretty substantial. So what are you finding continuing to be the fuel to your fire?
Novelty, I'm a novelty driven person, and really, it's a thing that you're always juggling. If you know that you are moved by learning new things. And when I say novelty, I mean, really what I mean is learning stuff. You know, I just am an information sponge. I just like reading books and finding out new stuff. You know, these days I'm reading about neurobiology. I have no background in science. I have, you know, it's just interesting to me. And so, you know, with knife making, I really started out focusing, you know, exclusively on Japanese swords when I got started. And I kind of moved away from that. I still make Japanese swords. I was out making a tanto, you know, forging a tanto yesterday. But it's not as big a focus as it was when I first got started. And to a large degree, that's a business thing. It just, I had a hard time making enough money because these things are so labor intense. I mean, people just have no concept of what labor is involved in making a katana. It's just unbelievable. And so you have to charge, I mean, like, I still lose money, you know, in the grand scheme of things, if I charge $10,000 for a Japanese sword. And so there are just not that many people who can plunk out, you know, $10,000. So so, you know, really for kind of practical reasons, I started meandering my way over to the Tactix Armory thing, which is, you know, more production type model. And very soon after you know, my excuse me, my original theory with Tactix Armory was, and, you know, I had a martial arts background, and so, you know, making kind of, you know, carry EDC type stuff was a sort of natural path for me. And so, you know, I said, well, you know, let me try this as a production type thing. I started doing it all on the belt grinder, and I worked through this process for pretty substantial amount of time, probably a year or two, and I finally realized, like, yeah, not working. Just, this is not good. It was too many hours in front of the belt grinder, and you know, it just wasn't fun either. I felt like a production worker. But even putting that aside, it just you know, I wasn't putting out enough knives to justify it really economically. And so I said, well, let me try CNC. And it probably took me a year and a half, 2 years before I really worked up the courage to buy a CNC machine and see what I could do with it. And I just really got into it. I really enjoy the whole process of designing the knife, and you know, making it, you know, not banging it with a hammer. It's not as organic. There's this whole, you know, you have to think through this whole production process. And I'm sure, of course, you're extremely familiar with what that, it's a kind of iterative thing. You know, you have to
very much
crunch through it, and then you find out, oh, if I put these holes here, I can't get there from here, and I got to go back. You know? That's a very frustrating thing, as you know. But you know, you have to be willing to work through that. You know, to say like, oh, I don't just quit and throw up my hands. You know, I go back. I'll figure out where to put the holes. You know, and I enjoy that. It's a very nerdy sort of approach to this stuff, but to me, it's fun. And so, you know, I kind of finally have doubled down on the CNC thing. I just got a big Haas, and you know, so you know, I love it, you know, and it's funny because I still, you know, every time I do that for a while, and because this past year it's just been really, I've been just thinking about Tactix Armory. I've done very, very little in the Japanese sword realm, haven't been forging a whole ton. Went out this week, and I spent the whole week in the forge, hammering, making tantos and, you know, tongs and stuff like that, you know, and I was like, oh, this is so great, the fire and the hammering, the physicality of it, you know. But I know that, you know, tomorrow I'm going to get up and start working on something on the CNC machine, and I kind of like that variety. It's a dumb business model, but it's fun for me.
Yeah. Well, when you say it's a dumb business model, I mean, at some point, the enjoyment is part of why you're here in the first place, right? I mean,
right.
that's kind of the motivation to get up and do all of this. None of this is like the easiest way to make a quick buck, for right. sure. So there's a lot of passion and so from your CAD and machining side, were you self-taught? What program have you found to be successful for that? Like, give me some of the technical information that you like to use for that side of things.
Just the history side of it. I bought a lathe, a metal lathe, probably 20 years ago. And I thought I was probably going to do some hobbyist gunsmithing. I really wasn't thinking about it in terms of knife making at all. But I figured, I'll use it some. And I also got a mill, and I don't remember a manual mill. I don't remember which one I got first. But I started feeling my way into the whole machining thing, and so. I to this day, in terms of manual machining, I'm not that good. I'm always like kind of making it up as I go along. I'm not formally trained at all. I mean, I've never even like gone to a community college and taken a course, which any sane person would do. But I mean, honestly, I love just like figuring stuff out myself, and so to me that's part of the fun of it. So anyway, by the time I got the CNC machine, I did have some sense that like you have to turn this thing at a certain speed or it's not going to work. You have to feed it at a certain speed, and and so the whole feeds and speeds thing and how deep and all that machining minutia, I had at least some sense of what I didn't know and what I needed to know more about. So, when I got into the CNC side, I bought a Tormach 770 for those who are into that sort of thing. I think I paid $11,000 for it. And, there are people who kind of deride Tormachs and these little hobbyist, and educational type machines. But the truth is, for what you pay, the capabilities of these things are unbelievable. I mean, I'm old enough, I predate CNC, period. Like, I came from the days back when people just twiddled knobs to make things. And so for me, I was able to look at the Tormach and say, this is just unbelievable what I can do with this. So I used Fusion 360 to design everything. Yep. The reason I started with it is just because it was cheap. It was free at the time. I pay for it now, but it's still way cheaper than AutoCAD or some of these,
Yeah, we use the same thing.
And, for people who are just getting started, the thing about CNC is that the prices, the cost of doing CNC stuff has come down, but you're still playing in the sandbox with Ford Motor Company. And so, a lot of the pricing for this stuff is really geared to giant international companies that can just throw money. Just, hey, here's more money, here's more money, here's more money, and, we can't do that. So you have to navigate your way through that. But nonetheless, like a human being, a normal person who doesn't have a, giant revolving credit with an international bank can actually buy a CNC machine. My Haas that I just bought, which is a beast, it, by industrial standards, it's not much, but by normal human standards, it's unbelievable what you can do with the thing. And it's a leap, huge leap over what the Tormach could do. And so, I can buy that for the price of a pickup truck, Right. So it's like, that's a lot of money. A pickup truck's a lot of money, but it's not, it's not like, it's not like I got to mortgage my house to get it.
Right. Well, when we started things, we bought the first mill we bought was a Bridgeport clone. Didn't have a DRO, no power feed. We're just sitting there turning knobs, and so the second mill we bought.
Footnote to that. How quick before you got the DRO?
Well, so funny story, quite a while. We actually bought 2 more mills with DROs, but we didn't know how to hook them up. Really? And so we had never had a DRO. I didn't even know what I was missing. And one day I walk out and Andy's like sitting there watching the readout. I'm like, oh, you got it hooked up. That's really cool. And I watched him for 2 minutes and I was like, oh my gosh, what have I been doing? Total game changer.
So the reason I asked is because I bought my mill and, you know, I was like, oh God, I'm going to have to, you know, it's like $1,300 or something to get the DRO on there. For those who are watching and don't know anything about machining, a DRO is a digital readout. It's just a little screen that shows how many thousandths of an inch or, you know, millimeters or whatever it is that you're traveling your tools around. Yeah. And so I bought the mill and I got it. And I twiddled the knobs for about 2 days, and I was like, "This is super stupid. I need to get a DRO." So I got a DRO, and you know, hooking it up yourself is a giant pain in the neck. But boy, the next day I was like,
Yep. Yeah. 100% worth it. Unbelievably worth it. As soon as we had it, I just could not even believe that we had done anything without it.
Absolutely.
Because it tells, you know, before that we're doing, you know, dicum and scribing lines and then cutting right to the edge of my line and then doing a finish pass to remove the line. And it's just, and then you check it and you're like, thousandths over what you were supposed to do, even though you were as careful as can be, you know. And we actually, you know, we were pretty hard on stuff in the beginning. I didn't have a machining well, we're blacksmiths, right? So, you know, I'm used to beating on stuff with hammers. So we were really hard on stuff. We actually ground the gears out of one of the Bridgeport heads that we had. We killed it. We broke all the auto down feeds we had. The first 2 power feeds we got, burned them up. So we were really hard on stuff, but finally by about our 5th mill, we had calmed down. We'd learned a lot more about feeds and speeds. You know, there's some great calculators, especially now. And then we actually had a shop in town close, a big machine shop closed, and the company that bought it literally just needed to get the equipment out the door because they had new equipment coming in. And so we were able to go down, and we got our very first CNC mill for free. We just had to go get it.
Right.
And it was a we still have it, running production every day. It's a 1991 Fadal. Cost me about $1,200 to move it and to get it, you know, set up.
Right.
And that taught me a lot about, you know, the jump from a Bridgeport to a machine from 1990 is kind of like you were saying, the Tormach to the Haas. It's like a completely new realm.
Right.
And we also got a Prototrack Bridgeport, which is a 2-axis CNC. Just a Bridgeport that's got, you know, a computer on it essentially.
Right.
And so we were starting to use these more complicated tools, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to get from Bridgeport to CNC. And so Andy and I actually went over and got trained by a guy in New York, but he did everything manually. So we're at the console typing in the programs. And so, you know, we're writing in our notebooks and all the programs are in notebooks and we go and input them right on the console. And I remember one of the guys working for us, we hired a real machinist, and he's like, hey, have you ever heard of Fusion 360? You know, and it was like, no, what's that? You know, and so he's like, well, I'm going to help. I'm going to help you. And so, you know, everything was hand-drawn, and you know, all of our drawings were literally drawings. And so from there to today, where I have, you know, a full-time engineer on staff that's trained in all the CAD programs, and when we want to make a change, we go pull up a model and we make a change, and then that revision tracks throughout the entire inventory system. It's like, you know, when we started this thing, we were using angle grinders and drill presses, and so it's pretty amazing to see that development. But you know, for the ability of a small maker, if I was still in the garage, I feel like I would leverage my house if I had to go get a CNC machine, because the capability that it allows you to do so much without standing there turning knobs or grinding or, drilling holes on the drill press. It just takes you out of the mix for however long you can program your system, right? So anyway, kind of jumping forward, now where you're at today, are you designing like pallet systems? Are you machining one blade at a time? Like, what's your workflow kind of day to day with your CNC side? How have you found that to be? How have you made that effective for you in the volume of blades that you're making?
Yeah, so for, the folks back home who, don't do machining, the thing that that machining equipment hate most are little flat things. And, one of the biggest challenge, honestly, the main challenge of machining is not how do you make a tool move around and cut something. It's how do you hold the thing while the machine's doing the work. And it seems dumb, but really, like, that's easily half the game. So for flat things, figuring that out without warping them or twisting them or making them fly off in the air and hit somebody in the face, or it's not a lay down how to do that. So for knife making, that's a big challenge, and I from basically day one with the CNC machine, I used a pallet system, so I use a Pearson pallet system.
Sure.
And I think I learned about it from John Saunders on CNC
NYC CNC.
NYC CNC, which I still give money to him on Patreon. I haven't watched one of his things in years because I learned so much stuff from his YouTube channel.
Same.
I still feel enormous gratitude for the stuff that I've learned from him. So anyway, the way the pallet system works, and of course you know this, but some people back home would not. The way a pallet system works is you have this base that sits inside your machine on the table, which is the part that moves around, and so the pallet is made so that you have this big aluminum block that can be taken off and put back on repeatedly so that you can keep it within a thousandth of an inch or so of the same place every single time you slap it back on there. So the way that I design this stuff is so that I have one pallet, at least this is the way I do it right now. I have one pallet for each type of blade that I make. And so you bolt stuff down onto there, you screw it onto the pallet, and so everything is made so that I can use an electric drill, screw it on, screw it off, so that going from one piece of metal to the next doesn't take too long. And so there's one operation that drills holes in a piece of metal, so I'm starting with a knife-sized just piece of flat stock, bar stock, and then I'll move that to a second position and I'll mill the outline and add any other features that would go on the periphery, or any engraving, or jimping, any of that kind of stuff, and then I'll move it to a third and fourth position where I mill the bevels. And so it's just taking that pallet in and out, or screwing things off and on. That's really the way it is just screwing things off and on. Right. And so, the beauty of this for me, and this gets back to this whole one-man show kind of thing, is that I can literally be doing 2 to 3 things at once like well, not in a stupid sort of way. So I can put something into the CNC machine, and you know, some of these things are very quick operations. If you're just drilling, it happens real fast. But there's other stuff that takes a good while. And so I can put it in there, and you know, like if you're a professional CNC operator, some factory puts something in the CNC machine, then you just sit there, you know, with nothing to do in some cases, depending on how many machines you have and all that sort of thing. But for me, you know, I put the thing down, hit the green button, boom, I'm off doing something else. And that way, you know, it's such a force multiplier. I can really not delusionally, you know, telling myself I'm doing something that I'm not. I can genuinely do twice as much work in one day. That's
absolutely
super cool.
Well, and it's like you said, it's absolutely necessary for a one-man show. You know, I mean, you have to have that. You're basically, it's a robot, right? I mean, that's kind of the thing. You're handing off. It's your design. It's your, you know, your pieces. You're picking the steel. You're picking the shapes. You're telling it what to do and how to do it, and then it does it the same way every single time. And you know, I think we're up to like 6 or 7 CNC mills here, and then we've got a nice big CNC lathe. But the amazing thing is every time you add one, it's like, oh, I have no idea how we were making this work without it. oh, how did we do that? You know, every single time. It really is incredible. And it, you know, we have 2 guys in our CNC department, and they each run about 3 to 4 machines at a time. And so they, you know, they're bouncing around. This machine's done. They're stocking it. They're walking over, deburring this part, stacking that up. You know, so being a one-man show, are you able to kind of set up multi-stage? Like, can you run a piece of metal in each stage of your pallet, or do you usually just move one through? Like, how do you think about that?
Yeah, so typically, you know, when I first got started, my theory was that I would be doing like you were saying, which is kind of sequencing it through there.
Right.
But what I found was it was actually faster. I mean, you know, I probably could make a multitude of pallets and set them all up and then fling them in and out. But I found that was, you know, the thing you're always balancing with CNC is how many units am I going to make of this ultimately versus the amount of upfront work.
Right.
Which, you know, if you haven't done CNC work and you think, oh, this is just pushing the green button, bro, you know.
Not quite.
Not quite. And, you know, the reality is that there's an enormous amount of very fiddly, complicated work.
Oh, yeah.
Up front before you can push that green button, even the first time. And you have to go back and iterate a lot of times because you didn't quite get it right the first time. And so I ultimately decided, you know, like if you talk to somebody at Ford who's, you know, got giant banks of CNC machines, and I'm sure even for you have to think about it this way. You're thinking like, okay, I'm paying $47 a day for this machine, and, you know, I want to keep the green light on for at least, you know, for the whole shift, and every minute that I lose it. So there's a kind of, you know, spreadsheet type approach to keeping that machine going. My thinking was, I could produce so many blades on there that I couldn't finish them all because the finishing part of it actually takes far longer than running them through the CNC machine. Yeah. So for me, finding the absolute fastest tool path, the most, you know, if you hired some efficiency expert with a PhD from Penn State, you know, he would say this is a really slow way of doing it. But actually, for me, in my processes, it works out fine, sometimes doing it kind of slower. And so, you know, I haven't knocked myself out trying to make my throughput on the CNC machine as fast as humanly possible because it's not worth the upfront effort that would be required to do that.
Sure. I totally get that. One of the things we deal with often is, you know, if I get, especially, I used to be really bad at this. I've gotten a lot better, but I'd get hyper focused on one part of the process. And it's not helpful because you have to follow the whole, that, in your case, knife, you have to follow it from the beginning all the way through to when it ships to the customer. And if I make that first stage too fast, all that happens is a bunch of inventory gets piled up in front of the next process. And especially as a one-man show, it's like, well, I'm doing both. So that, that doesn't move the needle one iota. You got to think of the whole, the whole trip of that raw material to finished product all the way through. So, when we implement changes now, it's because I'm looking at, let's say our assembly process is taking 2 hours. Every process in front of it's taking an hour. Well, I need to get my assembly process up before I think about anything else, because I can have that time and double the output of the total system. And so, we've got a couple of resources locally that do like lean training, and I read about the history of lean and got really nerdy into it because, the history isn't what it looks like today. The history was, Taiichi Ono with Toyota trying to save the company after the entire country of Japan had been decimated. They actually, their first truck came out with a single headlight and one set of brakes because they didn't have the raw materials to put anything else on you. That's that problem-solving passion that it's like, man, that resonates with me, to my bones, because that man had a hill to climb and ended up bringing an entire industry with him. So, I get really excited about that kind of stuff. But anyway, as you're kind of looking forward, I'll just kind of jump topics here. As you're looking forward, what are you hoping to accomplish over the next few years? Are you seeing additional, facets of business come to play, or are you just looking to really develop the depth and breadth of what you've already got started right now?
The latter. At this point, I'm really focusing on Tactix Armory, and let me talk a little bit about Tactix Armory and kind of how that morphed out of the Japanese sword thing. Like I said, I had been doing the Japanese sword thing for quite a while. When I first got started, I was kind of surprised at how many people were interested in buying stuff from me. Mm-hmm. I underpriced a whole bunch of swords, and it took me 10 years to work my way through my backlog. Wow. It was one of the most horrible things, that I've ever done in my life. And there were a lot of other things going on. My wife was sick, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that I was fighting my way through, all of this stuff. And the thing about the Japanese sword thing is it's kind of feast or famine because, you have to go through this long process to finish these things. And the footnote on that, my wife's fine now. So,
good. Wonderful.
All's well on that front. Yeah. But anyway, the Japanese sword model was very lumpy from a financial standpoint. I had to take, big chunks of money ahead of time, and then that's sitting on my shoulders psychologically while I was working my way through this. And, anyway, the bottom line was I love making Japanese swords from the work perspective, but it financially and like as a business thing, it worked very much like writing novels, which is a horrible business model because you get a big old chunk of money to do something. Once you're established, you get money up front, and then you have to write the book, but you have to make them happy. And if the editor or your agent or anybody in the chain of decision making doesn't like where you're going, then your amount X that is supposed to last for 6 months or a year may have to last for 18 months. And so now you goose egg for 6 months. And it's just unbelievably horrible, as a lifestyle. And that was the kind of cycle that I had to deal with Japanese swords, too. Just lumpy, and income goes up and down, all this kind of stuff. And it was all futures, So the reason that I moved in the direction of the Tactix Armory stuff, which is small, more production-oriented blades, was really, it seemed like a more sensible business model. Not that the job part of making the knives was as fun necessarily, though it's turned out to be incredibly gratifying. But that's another story. Anyway, once you sort of get on this train of doing CNC stuff, it has a certain kind of logic to it. And so about 4 years ago, I think, I started working on a folding knife. And I spent about 2 years refining that, and I finally decided at the end of that period, I can't do this as a business. It just doesn't work. It takes too much effort to make at least for me, it took too much effort to make a moderately priced knife that was up to my standards. And so I bailed out of that, basically wasted 2 years. And then in the process of that, my wife and I moved to a new place. I've got a much bigger shop here. And so I kind of lost a little more time in the move. Anybody who's moved shops, you just, if you haven't moved shops, you just don't realize, like, every little electrical thing takes days to figure out. Your air takes time to figure out. So it really took me 5 months to move over. So anyway, I don't want to. This is kind of boring, but anyway, the point is that I really
not at all.
I really, wasn't able to focus on sort of the core thing that I intended to do with Tactix Armory, which was making fixed blade knives. So anyway, I got the Haas this year. That was its own little saga. So now it's working. I've got it. It's great. It's fantastic. I feel like I was actually surprised. I was able to just hit the ground running, and it just did everything that I wanted and more.
That's awesome.
Which would have been totally impossible if I hadn't spent a lot of time figuring out what I was doing with CNC on the Tormach.
Right.
But anyway, so now, I've got all the pieces in place to really just say, like, okay, I'm focusing on this business model, this set of knives. I'm going to start doing a whole bunch more designs. I've refined the whole process of how I make these things and how I design them. And this is, for anybody who's thinking about doing stuff with CNC at all, it's a very comprehensive thing. Like, if you just think, oh, I'm just going to take this thing that I did this way and I'm just going to do it so I can hit the green button and out pops a knife. Ain't gonna work like that. You have to think your way through the whole manufacturing process.
Right.
The knives have to be redesigned, and that opens gateways to all kinds of cool things that you couldn't do in the previous, crank and the drill press type way.
Right.
But if you don't look at it as a whole package, you're barking up the wrong tree. So anyway, this coming, next couple of years, I want to be a big boy about this and really try and, use the CNC process in a smart way to move this thing to the next level, whatever that might be. I don't really know, but, hopefully I'll be selling more knives, making a little more money with it, and producing a lot more different kinds of designs and stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome. So one of the things that I'm curious about is how do you build into all this time spent on the production side? Do you just give yourself a day off to go forge? How do you think about, is that content creation for you? Like, do you just fit it into the schedule, or are you very mindful about how it sits in to separate your time when you're starting to get a little burnout on the CNC side? Do you just, I'm out? I mean, you're, the boss, so.
For me, burnout really is not an issue because, I mean, for good or ill, I got so many balls in the air that it's just like, I'm just trying to keep balls from hitting the ground. That's like my whole day is just trying to keep the balls from hitting the ground. Yeah. And burnout's really not so much an issue for me because there's constantly some other kind of, thing for me to think about that's popping up.
Yeah. Keeps it fresh, right?
Right.
Every day. Right. Well, is there anything, I don't want to take too much more of your time. You've spent a glorious whole hour with us here, and I want to let you get back to it. But anyway, Mr. Sorrells, it has been an absolute pleasure. And, absolutely check out YouTube channel, Tactix Armory, all that, in the Instagram, of course, as you continue to grow it. And, sir, I wish you the best. Thank you so much for generously sharing yourself with us today. And we'll have to do this again soon. Hopefully we can get you out for a class in the coming future. All right. Well, thank you so much, Walter Sorrells, for that incredible podcast. Spending well over an hour with us. We had some fun technical hiccups there in the beginning. And, if you want to stay in touch with Coal Ironworks, check out coalschool.com to see our upcoming classes. Right here in Anderson, Indiana, we've got Zach Herberholtz doing a one-day couples forged rose class. That's going to be fantastic. I might have to do that with my loved one, as well as Jason Knight himself is going to be in the house forging a brute to forge chopper. So check out coalschool.com for ways that you can come join us. You can clip it, right? Wait, I'll give you a pause. All right, thanks so much for listening, and stay tuned for more.
All right, hope you enjoyed that. Had a lot of fun with the guys at Coal Ironworks, and that's really all there is to say. Hope you enjoyed the interview, and I'll be back next week with something that I'm going to make here. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tactixarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.